America's history is way messier than you think. United States. Let's keep it real for a second. When people talk about American history, it's usually all freedom, founding fathers, and eagles flying in slow motion. The clean version. The textbook version. The USA. USA, highlight reel. But the real story? Yeah, it's way messier than you think. This isn't a hate piece. And it's not a hype piece either. This is the raw, unfiltered story of how America actually came up. The wins, the screw-ups, the chaos, and the contradictions. Because if you really want to understand the United States today, you gotta understand the madness that built it. So buckle up. This ride gets wild. Today in this video discuss Chapter 1. Before America was even a thing. Long before anyone ever said the word America, before maps drew straight lines and flags meant anything, this land already had a long, complicated, lived-in story. And yeah, it was way deeper than most people realize, stretching back through time so far that memory itself feels thin trying to hold it all. For tens of thousands of years, humans were already here, crossing slowly over ice and land during colder ages, following animals, reading the sky, learning which plants healed and which killed, adapting not in one sudden jump, but in countless small decisions repeated over generations until survival turned into culture and culture turned into identity. These weren't clueless wanderers just winging it in some untouched wilderness. They were problem solvers, planners, observers, people who learned the land so well that it shaped how they thought about life, time, power, and responsibility. Over centuries, those early groups became nations, not nations in the modern flag and anthem sense, but nations in the real sense, shared stories, shared ancestors, shared rules, shared obligations, and a deep sense of belonging that wasn't written on paper but carried in memory and ritual. The continent that would later be called North America was stacked with diversity. Thousands of tribes, hundreds of languages, wildly different ways of living depending on whether you were dealing with frozen coasts, dense forests, endless plains, mountains, rivers, or deserts that looked empty to outsiders but were actually full of meaning and strategy. People in the Arctic mastered survival in conditions Europeans couldn't last a week in, turning ice and animal skins into shelter and warmth. Tracking seasons with precision because getting it wrong meant death. In the Southwest, societies figured out how to farm in dry land using irrigation, stone tools, and timing that matched rainfall patterns perfectly. In the eastern woodlands, communities built villages surrounded by forests they actively managed, not destroying them but shaping them through controlled burns that kept undergrowth low, encouraged new plant growth, and attracted animals. This wasn't untouched nature, it was curated, shaped, respected, and sometimes fought with, but never seen as separate from human life. Fire wasn't just danger, it was a tool, a reset button, a way to keep balance. Crops weren't random experiments, they were the result of generations of trial and error, and the agricultural systems developed here were straight-up genius. Corn, beans, and squash grown together supported each other physically and nutritionally, a system so effective that modern agriculture still studies it. Trade networks crisscrossed the continent long before Europeans ever showed up thinking they invented commerce. Obsidian from volcanic regions, shells from distant coasts, copper from the Great Lakes, food, tools, stories, and ideas moving along routes that connected people who might never meet face to face. Cities existed too, real ones, not just villages. Cahokia near the Mississippi River had massive earth mounds built by hand, planned neighborhoods, ceremonial centers, and a population that at its peak was larger than London at the same time, which seriously messes with the old myth that civilization was some exclusive European club. Spiritual life was everywhere and in everything. Rivers weren't just water, they were ancestors, teachers, warnings. Mountains weren't obstacles, they were sacred markers. Animals weren't just meat, they were beings with lessons to teach. Leadership didn't always look like kings and crowns. Sometimes it was councils, sometimes it was elders, sometimes power flowed through women's lines, sometimes authority rotated to prevent corruption. It wasn't perfect, conflict existed, wars happened, but the systems worked well enough to sustain life for centuries without wrecking the land. Then Europe entered the chat and everything shifted fast. Europeans didn't come because they were enlightened explorers chasing destiny. They came because Europe was crowded, broke, and locked in power struggles that made expansion feel necessary. Trade routes to Asia were blocked or controlled by rivals, and European kingdoms were desperate for shortcuts to wealth, spices, silk, gold, and the flex that came with claiming new territory. Exploration was business mixed with ego and heavy religious justification. God talk used to bless straight-up greed. When Christopher Columbus landed in 1492, he didn't discover anything new, he just stumbled into an already populated world and claimed it anyway, thinking he'd reached Asia and acting like land full of people was an unclaimed item. That mindset set the tone for everything that followed. Europeans didn't see sovereign nations, they saw opportunity, resources, and souls to convert. The first wave of contact wasn't even armies, it was disease, and this part gets dark fast. Smallpox, measles, influenza moved through native communities like a silent apocalypse. People had no immunity, no defenses, no understanding of what was happening. Entire villages collapsed, elders died first, and with them went history, medicine, leadership, social order. In some regions up to 90% of the population died within a century. That kind of loss breaks societies at the core. Europeans walked into lands already destabilized, then used that weakness to expand while telling themselves it was destiny. Spain moved aggressively, building an empire fueled by gold and enforced conversion, enslaving indigenous people through systems that were basically legalized torture, working them to death in mines and fields while claiming moral high ground. Resistance was crushed, cultures erased, languages silenced. Spain's main focus stayed further south and west, but their presence reshaped the entire hemisphere. France came in differently, sliding through rivers and forests from Canada, focused on fur trading rather than mass settlement, building alliances with native nations, learning languages, intermarrying, relying on cooperation because they needed it to survive. It wasn't equality, power was still uneven, but it created a different dynamic that lasted for decades. Britain watched all of this carefully and decided to play the long game. By the early 1600s, England was ready to plant permanent colonies, not just trading posts but full communities meant to stay. Jamestown in 1607 was the first serious attempt, and honestly it was a hot mess. The settlers weren't farmers or survival experts, many were gentlemen chasing profit, not planting crops. They didn't understand the land, the seasons, or the food sources, and they almost wiped themselves out through starvation and disease. Without help from native groups like the Powhatan Confederacy, Jamestown would have been a failed experiment, and that's facts. But that help didn't lead to respect or partnership. As more settlers arrived, land hunger kicked in hard. Europeans believed land was property, something you owned, fenced, sold, and exploited. Native societies believed land was something you belonged to, something you were responsible for. That philosophical clash made long-term peace basically impossible. Further north, Puritans arrived, claiming they wanted religious freedom, but low-key what they really wanted was control, freedom for themselves, not tolerance for difference. They built strict communities with heavy rules, punished anyone who stepped out of line, and believed they were chosen by God to build a perfect society, a city upon a hill. That belief of moral superiority and divine mission would echo through American history again and again. As the colonies slowly grew, labor demands exploded. At first, indentured servants filled the gap, poor Europeans working off debt. But over time, enslaved Africans became the backbone of colonial economies, especially in the South. Slavery didn't begin as a fully racial system, but laws quickly locked it in place. Blackness became associated with permanent bondage, whiteness with protection and privilege. These weren't accidents or misunderstandings, they were deliberate choices made to protect wealth and maintain control. Plantations expanded, tobacco, rice, and later cotton generated insane profits for a small elite, while enslaved people lived under constant violence, surveillance, and fear. Families were torn apart without warning, resistance was punished brutally, survival itself became an act of defiance. At the same time, native nations were being pushed, tricked, or forced off their lands through broken treaties, manipulation, and outright war. Conflicts like King Philip's War showed just how brutal early colonial life already was. Entire towns burned, civilians targeted, total war before the idea of America even existed. By the end of those conflicts, native resistance in large regions was crushed and English dominance locked in, setting a pattern that would repeat over and over: cooperation when settlers were weak, force when settlers felt strong, always expanding, never satisfied, always wanting more land, more control, more security, more profit. Chapter 1 ends here. But this was just the setup, the backstory before everything went sideways. If this story hooked you, hit like, subscribe, and stay locked in, we're only getting started. Chapter 2 drops soon, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.